This poster appears around town. It was illustrated by our first reader. And if you ask nicely, we have a couple copies here. He might sign one for you. Our first reader was born in Moscow, USSR. He's very proud of the USSR. In 1970, and immigrated to the United States in 1978. He got in his first trouble in the first grade for doodling on his Lenin Red Star pin and hasn't stopped doodling since. After a false start at the Parsons School of Design in New York, he graduated with a BFA in painting and printmaking from Chicago's very own School of the Art Institute of Chicago in 1993, whereupon he promptly began driving a cab, first in Boston and then later in Chicago, which directly led to the publication of his illustrated memoir, Hack, Stories from a Chicago Cab, by the University of Chicago Press in 2011. He still paints and writes in Chicago, but no longer drives a cab. Please welcome Dmitry Samarov.
Do I need to be facing any which way, or
The audience.
the audience? Okay. Hi. So this concerns the night that the Blackhawks won the Stanley Cup and how I celebrated. Monday night started out innocently enough. I got off work at the coffee shop in Beverly and rode my bike east down 91st Street to the metro station. I was headed to Ukrainian Village to meet a friend for a drink. My plan was to take the Rock Island line downtown, then pedal the couple miles remaining to the bar. I love riding, but I'm in no shape to ride the whole 13 or 14 miles. Somewhere in the back of my head, I knew the hockey game would be on, and thus chose a bar where the TV is only on a few times a year, for the Academy Awards and the Super Bowl, and not much else. The bike route from downtown Chicago to Ukrainian Village mostly runs along Milwaukee Avenue. It's the most heavily used bike lane in the city, sometimes dubbed the hipster highway. Not only am I out of shape, but my bike was built for comfort, not speed. Dozens of cyclists blew by me like I was standing still, and that was all right. It was nearly 90 degrees out, and I was in no hurry. I got to the Rainbow about half an hour early. I'd heard there might be a flash storm coming and asked Matt, the bartender, if I could take the bike inside. He had no problem with that since the bar was nearly empty at 6 p.m. on a Monday. Halfway into my first vodka soda, we could feel the wind and rain whipping around outside without even seeing it. The Rainbow's only window is a diamond-shaped porthole in the front door. The storm was gone as quickly as it had come. My friend John walked through the door just a few minutes later. We talked about the movie he'd just finished making and what he was going to take up next. We talked about the chances of some studio picking up the TV show idea we'd worked on a year before. He bought the drinks since he was currently flush, while I was barely managing to pay the bills every month. Matt said he felt pretty bad for the late shift bartender, Kenny, who would be relieving him at 8 p.m. because the bar would be dead until the hockey game ended. Around 8 p.m., John had to leave for another engagement, and I decided to bike to a place on Western to meet another friend for another drink. The Blind Robin was full of red, black, and white jerseys, their owners' eyes glued to the flat screens above the bar. The fans made bad sex sounds in reaction to what was happening in the game, while Ray and I talked about my impending marriage and her impending divorce. When the game ended, we watched the exultant crowd around us rather than anything going on the TV screens. It wasn't our joy, but at least we could enjoy the sudden happiness of others. I walked Ray and another friend home, then got on the bike for the ride south. When the Blackhawks won the Stanley Cup in 2010, I had to drive my cab through the madness of their fans' celebration. This time around, I was content to read reports about meatheads throwing bottles at the police on Twitter. Heartening to know that masses of long-suffering bros had finally found a cause to rally around. I saw the occasional cop car fly by as I pedaled south, but for the most part, the people in the neighborhoods I was riding through didn't seem so concerned with hockey. I passed warehouses and darkened buildings. A lot of places were still without power from the brief but violent storm that had whipped through the city several hours before. At 18th Street, in a fit of alcohol-inspired nostalgia, I decided to stop at Don's Grill for a cheeseburger. Don's is one of those old-fashioned all-night diners where you can only sit on stools bolted into the floor, and the counterman takes your order, then turns away and fries it all on the flat top for you. I used to live down the street and still stop in from time to time. The 3 or 4 other patrons didn't seem especially jubilant about the Stanley Cup, or anything else for that matter. I ate my burger and onion rings, paid, and got back on my bike. My plan had been to get on the southbound Western Avenue bus when I got tired, but no buses passed me. So I just kept going. At around 61st Street, I felt the bike chain slip. Somehow, a bungee cord from my bike rack had wrapped itself around the base of the back wheel and had popped the chain off. I managed to free the cord, but could not get at the chain because my bike has a mudguard that completely encloses it. I didn't even have a Swiss Army knife on me. I took the 49 bus to its terminus at 79th Street, watching my bike wobbling on the bus's front rack every time the bus hit a rut or pothole, which, on that stretch of Western, happens pretty often. I was still about 3 miles from home and decided to walk rather than waiting for another bus. The Dan Ryan Woods, something between a city park and a forest preserve, lines Western Avenue from 83rd Street to 91st Street, so I didn't cross paths with many people. A homeless person sleeping, surrounded by all his belongings in a bus shelter, was the only one that really left any impression. I wondered whether he knew or cared about the Blackhawks. Mostly, it was broken tree branches blocking my path. It was around 12:30 a.m. by now, and I was pretty wiped out. This was the most exercise I'd gotten in years. Hard-boiled coffee, where I work afternoons, was at about the halfway point of my walk home. I had keys to the place, so I decided to try to use tools there to fix the chain so I could pedal the rest of the way. I dug through my wallet and found a 4-digit number I thought was the store alarm code. It wasn't. The alarm kept blaring as I punched the same wrong numbers in over and over, kept trilling as I called Greg, the owner, and left a panicked voicemail. And as I dug through my wallet and finally found the correct password. The alarm went mercifully silent, but I was covered in sweat in the darkened shop. There's no electricity on for blocks, and thus no fans or air conditioner on here. The alarm was the only thing that still worked. I'd just gotten the mudguard off when the cops arrived. After convincing them that I did indeed work there, one was a morning regular, which helped. I went back to the bike, but it was no use. I'm no mechanic, and whatever that bungee cord had done was beyond my abilities to mend. I put the bike in the back room, locked up the store, and started walking south again. My t-shirt was soaked in sweat, my hands were covered in axle grease, but I couldn't resist the urge to check on the Stanley Cup celebrations via Twitter. I read reports of smashed storefronts and packs of marauding bros in Lincoln Park and Wrigleyville as I walked up the quiet tree-lined streets of Beverly to my house. Had I walked further south on Western to the Cork and Kerry and the other sports bars down that way, I'd have seen my share of ugly post-championship hangover, but I was thankfully spared all that. The only celebration I witnessed was the dog barking like a maniac as I unlocked the door. He does that every time I come home. Stanley Cup or no Stanley Cup. Next morning I woke up late, aching all over from the alcohol and the unplanned exercise. I walked to work and told Greg about my little adventure. He didn't even get the voicemail I'd left him till he woke up in the morning. Good thing it wasn't an actual break-in. Beverly Bicycles, a couple doors north of the coffee shop, fixed my chain for free. Customers came in and wanted to relive the glory of the game. I nodded along with them, but for me, the memory of the night the Chicago Blackhawks won the 2013 Stanley Cup would have very little to do with hockey. Thank you.
Dmitry Samarov, thank you.